The next topic is dark data, and it's not a topic that I think is something that a lot of people talk about. But dark data is relatively defined as data that organizations have but are unaware of. And so I'm really looking forward to this presentation today. So to give us a better understanding of this topic. All right, there you go. So hey, how you doing this morning?
Hi, everyone. I'm doing great. Happy to be here.
All right. Well, you can give us an understanding of your background, talk a little bit about maybe your passion for this, and then you can go into your presentation. I'm looking forward to it.
Sounds great. Well, I'm George. I'm George Firican. I'm really a data governance and business intelligence practitioner. So that's where my passion as well as my knowledge and experience lie. I'm also the founder of lightsondata.com, whose mission is really to create practical and engaging educational content and courses on different data management areas. I'm also the co-host of the Lights on Data show, which is really helping organizations just get more visibility on social media through content that the data community can benefit from. But my daily job is with the University of British Columbia as their director of, you guessed it, data governance and business intelligence. So again, I'm very passionate about these topics, and thank you DataWorks and Angel for having me as a speaker today to put the lights on dark data. And as Sean mentioned, there's a definition there in place, but we're gonna go a little bit deeper into really what it is and all the different areas what dark data is. So we'll spend a few minutes here. We'll see what are the risks of having dark data, as well as benefits. Are there any benefits that we could extract from dark data? And then we'll conclude the presentation as such. So dark data, what it is. I think this is sort of the question that's on everybody's mind. And again, as a data governance professional, I feel it's sort of my duty to make meaning and sense out of this and come out with a common definition. So of course, we'll start with what dark data is here. We'll make it fun. There are sort of three areas that we can look at when we're talking about dark data. And there's a lot of assumptions here. And the first one, I think a lot of times, this is the most obvious answer that comes into people's minds when they kind of hear of dark data. They equate it to the dark web. And if you're not familiar with the dark web is really a part of the internet that's not indexed by search engines. And you've no doubt heard talk of the dark web as, a hotbed of criminal activity. And it is. I mean, you can buy credit card numbers, all manner of drugs and stolen subscription credentials and many more worse things than that. But, it's not everything is illegal on the dark web. It also has a legitimate side. But out of all things, it's estimated that 60% of the information that we can find on the dark web could potentially harm enterprises. So back to our dark data, you could think of this data from the dark web, that it could be strawn from dark, have dark data embedded in there. Now, another way of looking at it is that it's just bad data, and not bad as in harmful in the way that some of the information and services that you can purchase off the dark web are, but more in the sense of bad data quality, poor data quality. And to be honest, I think that at times, bad quality data can be more harmful to an organization than some of the information found on the dark web. I mean, the estimate for, at least for the US economy, is that bad data is costing the US economy, was it like $3.1 trillion each year? That's a lot of money. Now, this last one is a little bit more funny. Sometimes people equate the dark data with sort of strange, quirky, weird data sets, such as, UFO sightings. There's like 80,000 historical data sets of UFO sightings. Or there's this data set with names of all registered dogs in different cities. There's the million song data set, which, as the name says, it has metadata on 1 million songs. Or this one is actually my favorite, and especially if you're in love with Mexican food. This one data set is rating the burritos in San Diego, in California. And it rates them, across the volume of the burrito, tortilla quality, salsa quality, variety, wrap integrity. There's 10 dimensions of this data set. So that's definitely a strange data set for sure. So back to our question, what dark data is. Again, dark data might equate to data from the dark web, but Gartner is thinking of it as information assets that organizations collect, process, and store during regular business activities, but generally they fail to use for other purposes. So again, it could be data from the dark web. Deloitte actually acknowledges that dark data extends into information that can be found in the deep web and the dark web. And it could also be, strange data if those pieces of data are collected, they're created, but they're not used. Yeah, that could definitely be the case. But let me give you some concrete examples here. I think dark data is kind of like the photos, or a lot of the photos on your mobile phone. Most of them will never be used or even viewed again, but we have them. According to Gigaom, the average person has 630 photos stored on their phone, and this was back in 2015. Back in 2017, InfoTrends estimated that there were over 1.2 trillion photos being taken with a mobile phone, and the number obviously keeps on increasing. I'm sure it's a lot higher than that, considering how cheap storage is becoming, especially cloud services. That number is only going to go up. So again, you're taking all these photos. Some could even be photos that you've taken by accident as you're, taking your phone out of your pocket. I know it happened to me quite a few times. And you're not really bothered on deleting them. Or, I know every time I'm passing my phone to my grandma, who is actually quite tech savvy, but, sometimes she's pressing that, the photo, the capture button for too long. So there's like all these snapshots and there's like 50 of them in one photo. And, you don't bother deleting them just because storage is cheap. And you're like, instead of going through each one and deleting them, I'll just leave them there. So that's an example of dark data. But let's move on to other examples here. IBM is actually estimating that roughly 90% of the data produced by sensors and analog to digital conversions never get used. 90% of that. And that's a lot of dark data there. And from these examples so far, you might think, well, that doesn't apply to us. It doesn't apply to our companies. We don't store sensor data or photos. Well, that's not all the examples of dark data. So remember, dark data represents all the information companies collect in their regular business processes. They don't use, they have no plan to use, but will never throw out. They're kind of, hoarders. So it's, log files, it's web logs, it's visitor tracking data, it's surveillance footage, email correspondence from past employees, raw survey data, all versions of documents or notes or presentations like this one. I have another version of it, which I might not use, but I'm just going to keep it there just in case. But even transactional data. So when you're hearing all these examples, you might think of big data. And yes, arguably dark data is a subset of big data, but not only. As we can see from this graph from, KD Nuggets here, the area shown in black indicates the dark data. And the image illustrates the notional percentage of dark data that is presented at any time. And dark data is the biggest portion under big data, yes. But it can also be a part of the traditional enterprise data, such as, customer data, employee data, and as I mentioned, maybe even transactional data. So that's a lot of dark data. As we can see from this infographic, day in data, there's a lot of data out there overall, right? So the entire digital universe was estimated to be 44 zettabytes in 2020, last year. It's arguably more this year as it keeps on increasing. And if this number is correct, the 44 zettabytes, it will mean that there are 40 times more bytes than there are stars in the observable universe. And IBM indicates that 93% of this data is currently dark. Other estimates mention that dark data that comprises more than half of the data that's collected by companies, so around 55%. And what's interesting is that within this category of data lies sort of two subcategories. Data that they know has been captured, but don't know how to use it, and data that they are not even sure with certainty that they have. They as in the organization. So that dark data comprises more than half of the data collected by companies. That's definitely a lot. So why do we care? Why do we care that all this data is being collected, it's being stored, it's not being used? Well, there are definitely risks associated with it. And we'll start with the first one. And definitely from a legal and regulatory compliance, right? If part of this dark data is really covered by any regulations, and some are, so let's say somehow we have some credit card information in there, so it's being governed by the PCI DSS regulation. Exposure of such data could really throw companies into financial and legal liabilities, right? According to this survey from this digital security company called Gemalto, they were mentioning that 46% of executives believe their companies do not know where all the sensitive or private information is stored. That's not good, right? Lack of clarity of where the data is stored really makes it difficult to safeguard sensitive information. So considering the cost of dealing with data breaches and the associated penalties, especially government penalties that are being thrown at this, dark data can be very expensive. So let me give you an example, because you might be thinking, well, surely nobody is really storing all this sensitive information in areas, in types of data that's not being used. Why would you do that? There's this example from 2018 from Twitter, where Twitter had this bug where user passwords were stored unmasked in their internal logs, unbeknownst to the Twitter administrators. And this is probably one of the worst cases of dark data gone wrong. And while Twitter doesn't think anyone outside of Twitter was able to access this data, it's still a big deal, right? I mean, storing users' passwords in logs is a terrible practice. And yes, it was a bug that was making that happen. But have they not having some sort of a dark data policy that was really scouring through these logs and identifying if there's really anything that needs to be classified in there, they would have never found out. So it's also an example of good management of dark data, I guess. Another one that is related to it is really the reputational loss. I mean, companies are really viewed as the custodians of the data that they collect. So again, any loss of data, especially sensitive, confidential data, as we've seen with the Twitter example, it can definitely result in a loss of reputation. And of course, we have storage and opportunity costs. So it's estimated that the global cost of dark data was $3.3 trillion US in 2020 last year. And Veritas is estimating that it's costing the average mid-sized organization that's holding about 1,000 terabytes of data more than $650,000 annually just to store non-critical information. And considering how a percentage of that is dark data, that's a lot of money just wasted for stuff that you're not using, right? And beyond the actual cost of storage, I think the management of dark data also eats up, valuable resources. So, think about it this way. All electronically stored data is vulnerable to legal discovery if potential litigation emerges. So how much time and energy will it take to pull, customer conversations out of storage if you're just storing those customers' conversations just in case and you're not using it? That brings me to the opportunity cost, because if a company decides not to invest in the analysis and processing of dark data, but its competitors do, its competitors are more likely to just, inch ahead in the competition because of the usage of the insights from dark data. So that's kind of the cost that a company is paying because of the lost opportunities, which brings us to the next section on the benefits. Are there any benefits of dark data? And yes, I think there are. And this is one of my favorite examples. You see all these, tweets coming out of the different areas of New York City, which is what you're seeing here. And, it's things like, oh, stuffy nose, feeling miserable. Oh, I need some chicken soup. Oh, I'm feeling awful. My throat is killing me. Things like that. And a lot of the tweets that go out there, they don't serve any purpose, maybe other than sort of you putting your message out there. But a lot of times nobody's reading them. You're not getting a reply, a like, nothing. You're just putting it into the ether. And this research team from the University of Rochester created this algorithm that could spot flu trends and make predictions based on keywords in publicly available geotagged tweets. So basically, it could track the spread of flu and predict which users are going to get sick next, based on, again, tweets that otherwise had no other purpose. Then they've actually improved their algorithm to predict when people will get sick 8 days before they fell ill. So 8 days before they were even tweeting about their symptoms. Again, with not just Twitter, but of course machine learning and natural language understanding techniques. And their accuracy, 90%. That's staggering. And I can talk about this for a lot longer, but I want to give you this other example. So this one is an European logistic company that's operating, I think, more than 30 warehouses in Spain. And they wanted to just gain a deeper operational understanding of activity in its facilities. Why? Well, just to, sustain and increase productivity, increase security of staff and goods, and just optimize the processing of work orders. And they managed to do this by tapping into the dark data that was collected by their Wi-Fi infrastructure. So all this Wi-Fi infrastructure, all these sensors that they had throughout the warehouse was collecting data related to devices attached to workers and equipment. And they were collecting data such as device location, presence, motion. And tapping into this data allowed them to know things such as, the precise location of vehicles, what the population was in distinct areas, and heat maps and flow maps that were viewed by time and device and vehicle and zone and so on. They also had the worker arrival, departure, even breaks, and productivity metrics such as the time between different operations. So a lot of fun stuff. So as a conclusion, dark data can definitely get a lot of benefits from it. There's also a lot of risks, but that's why we need to put the lights on dark data, understand what it is, identify it, classify it, and just make the business case for what to keep and what not to keep. And for what not to keep, let's not just hold it just in case, but really have the plan to get rid of the rest, like for good. We don't need that risk in there. So that's my presentation on putting the lights on dark data. I hope you enjoyed it, and please feel free to engage with me on LinkedIn or any of these other channels.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you. I really like that. That was you went deeper than just the general definition that I laid out.
I went deeper. Yes.
Absolutely. Very, very cool. I know that, God, this is really cool. I mean, I know that we've heard a lot about like how AI, if you will, is impacting COVID-19. How do you think people should be using dark data relating to COVID-19, like in terms of like, how they can get, I don't know, whether it's pharmaceutical companies, whether it's anyone, can use dark data related to COVID-19 for some sort of success, if you will, in that realm? Give us maybe like a use case or, any sort of, scenarios like that.
Well, I was trying actually to get in touch with the this team of researchers from the Rochester University to kind of see, did they apply similar techniques to COVID? But I don't know if they've been contracted already and sworn to secrecy, but couldn't get much of a word out of them. But that's definitely one to take a look at the social media activity and what people are saying and everything, and just to understand really the spread of information, but also the spread of the disease itself.
Got it.
Just from like the geo movements that we're tracking and what people are saying, and could that, again, we deduce that, hey, that person is sick and they're chatting with this other person, and we can see that they interacted at one point based on their feeds and their geolocations. And could that signify that there's a risk of them, having been in close proximity, passing on the virus to one another?
Right. Okay. What do you think should be in a business action plan, say, on dark data? I mean, I know that a lot of companies have things that are just sort of centralized, and that's sort of That just is a part of the traditional structure of businesses. This department does this department does that. And as I was chatting with somebody earlier, I've worked for companies that were siloed.
Yep.
And you know, and a siloed company is just the worst thing, particularly when you want to work across with people and get a chance to know what they're doing, and then they can know what you're doing. And I think that makes everything cool. But what do you think? Just, you know, some really powerful things that a business can do, you know, that they can put in their business action, you know, their action plan rather, for dark data.
Yeah. So listen, the chance is, if the company is operating in silos, from a data perspective at least, but from a business perspective too, I think those go hand in hand, right? Data and the business needs. It's because they don't have data governance in place.
Got it.
So I'm a strong advocate of that. So, you know, like you said, it's data might be collected and remain unused, even though it might be relevant to other departments, but those departments are unaware of what's been captured, how it's been captured, how it's been stored, processed, and everything, and they might not even know how they could get their hands on it. So right. From that point of view, you could get data that you're storing for whatever reason, or no reason at all. Just, it's kind of like just because or just in case. But already other departments could be using it and effectively turn that dark data into just data. But those other departments are unaware of it. So from a strategy perspective, I think that's the first step. Just put data governance in place at the enterprise level. It just uncovers all these meanings, all the purposes, and all the different types of data that we're collecting. Why are we collecting it? What they represent, what they should be used for. And then just do kind of a, you know, cost benefit analysis and see what should we keep. Again, you know, I think, you know, I might need it someday, it's not good enough of a reason anymore.
Right. I got you. And I guess lastly here, how can a company sort of benefit from, I know that you have, I guess the terminology is bring your own device environments, something along that line. And these are, you know, situations where, you know, an employee brings in their own device. What can companies sort of get from, you know, the dark data from those kinds of environments where people are bringing in, you know, their own device?
Yeah, and you know, this is a touchy subject too, because there's like sort of a fine line between what can we track about our employees, you know, and what's legal, right? And so we gotta, you know, be careful with that, and we gotta play within the rules, of course. But yes, like we've seen from the warehouse example, from that company in Spain that was operating in Spain, is just really having all these Wi-Fi sensors that allows us within the company to have Wi-Fi wherever we go, you know, on our phones and our laptops and things like that. All of that is really collecting information about the device.
Yes.
And if you have multiple devices, which you usually do in order to get a better coverage, you can sort of triangulate all the signals and somewhat estimate, well, where is that device located within that office space? Or even, you know, if you have a bigger company, you have a campus like Microsoft, you can determine their place within that overall structure. Not only that, but you know, there are even companies such as telecom companies that have started to sell information about their sort of the geolocation of their customers.
Wow.
It's information that they're collecting. Yeah. They weren't doing anything with it. It's just because they can, type of a thing.
Right.
But now they found a way to capitalize it and sell it to, you know, advertising companies, and you know, make some money out of it. Or even some of the app developers. So for example, you might not know this. I'm not going to call the app, but there's this weather app. It's quite famous.
Okay.
You know, you look it up, you see what the weather is, and you know, seems everything's fine. You obviously agree to their terms and agreements, but they're capturing your location where you are.
Wow.
And they're selling that information to researchers, to marketing companies mostly. Why? Because they could see when you're checking that information, and even when you're not checking the app, they could still track your location if you've agreed to it. And they could see that, you know what, this person is, you know, 8 hours, 10 hours in the same location. And it's during the night. That's probably their house. So we know they're living in that area. And based on that, zip code, we know maybe that's sort of a, rich area. And we can sell that information to other people that say, you can target people living in here, because we also know that they tend to travel over here, at the beach. So they like that type of activity. They tend to work over there in that complex, because that's another 8 hours during the day that we can monitor their presence. So there's different ways that this could be monetized as well, of course. But with the company itself, about its employees, like I mentioned, just tracking the location of its employees could be, quite interesting from just the energy usage consumption. Right. And to see what areas are used more than others, and helping them redefine those working spaces that way. And
yeah, but it brings up the ethical issue too, by the way.
The ethical issue is big, yes, with anything that we do with data.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, man, for really doing a deep dive on this particular topic. I know definitely elevated our perspective on this one.